mile. Leaving Trump, I ain't seen no whiskey but the blues, baby. Sloppy drunk, I ain't never seen no whiskey.
Hey tubers. Alright, so we got this motorhome. This is kind of a new project. It's something for me to work on over the summer. Probably pull it completely apart and go over it. It's a 1918, sorry, it's not a 1918, it's a 1916 Waterloo contract engine. Actually in 1918, Waterloo Boy was, or the Waterloo Engine Company was bought out by Deere, which became John Deere, so Deere and Company in 1918. This one was built in 1916 according to the serial number, which is actually stamped on the end of the crankshaft over there. Waterloo contract engine. Well, so Waterloo made their own engines. They made Waterloo Boy engines, they made tractors, they made all sorts, but they also made engines like these. This is a horse and a half. They made them for themselves. They also made them for different companies. So that's why you would call this a Waterloo contract engine. So Waterloo made engines for, so far, apparently 62 different companies. It's a lot of different companies they made engines for. You can tell a lot of things are very similar as far as the castings and you know, hoppers and flywheels, things like that. Best I can figure is up here in Canada, this was made for the Timothy Eaton Company. There were a lot of different ones made in the States, but up here in Canada, there was only a few different Waterloo contract engines. So there is no tag on this one. On this one, the tag would be found right here. Unfortunately, it's missing. That doesn't make it great. It's nice that the brass pins are there, but it would be nice to have that tag, obviously. So I've gone over this engine. I picked it up at a, you know, I think it was a pretty fair price for what I didn't know and what I did know about the engine. So what I did know was, in general, it wasn't seized. So the flywheels did turn. They were tough to turn, and the valves were a bit tough. So the valves are freed up now. So I've done a bunch of work before I've actually even fired it up. Working on these engines, you kind of get to know the things you're going to have to get your hands on before you can kind of trust the fact that it's going to run. There's really no point trying to crank over those flywheels unless a few different things are addressed. So firstly was the valves, getting the valves freed up. Happily, I didn't have to pull the head. There are a few condition issues with this engine, which I didn't know about when I got it, which is why I kind of, you know, why I offered the price I did for it. One thing is it's got a brazed rocker arm. Not a big deal, but, you know, it's not perfect, obviously. So whoever brazed it did a pretty decent job of it, I think. This mixer, what is the name of that mixer? Winsler? I believe it's called a Winsler mixer. It's got some brazing on it. Quite often, virtually never will you find this mixer not repaired. So this one has some brazing here. You know, what would happen was somebody would kick it or knock it. Originally, you'd have a feed tube down here running along the back to a fuel tank in the back. So, you know, it would get knocked and basically this being pipe, well, this would break first because it's brittle and it's casting. So this pipe would snap right out of the casting. So this has been repaired on the back side. Not a big deal. It's repaired, and I think it's suitable. I've removed the Winsler mixer. I've cleaned it all out. In the bottom, down here, there is a check ball. I've removed it. There was no check ball in it when I got it. I pulled it all apart, cleaned the whole thing, put a check ball in it. You can kind of hear it rattling around in there. Everything else with that mixer, I think, is okay. Talked about this. The valves were a bit sticky, but you know, I've got them freed up and I think they're fine. I have to pull the igniter out. Igniter? What's an igniter? Well, you know what a spark plug is, right? Obviously, most of you know what a spark plug is. An igniter is just something that ignites the fuel inside the cylinder. So basically it makes a spark. Some of you may be younger, you don't know what points are, but you have a contact point inside here that initially the points will touch, make a circuit in the coil through the battery, and when they break, which means when they separate, a spark happens. A spark happens because the voltage is trying to continue on in circuit, and in its last breath it basically just tries to jump that gap to continue on, and that spark is what causes the fuel to ignite. Anyway, we'll pull this igniter off, have a look at it. Maybe a lot of you don't know what an igniter looks like inside. I'll pull it off and we'll go over it. There's a lot of weird paint on here. I would say none of it is original. There's 2 colors of green on there. I don't think either of those colors of green are original to this. There's also some, what do you call it? Primer. There's a bunch of primer on the flywheel, so no big deal. I'm not fussed about the paint. Paint is no big deal to me. As a matter of fact, I don't even like paint. So on this side, there was something interesting that I came across, and it was this little mark here on the side, which is down inside the hopper, which I have not, you can't see down there, but that's your water hopper. Keeps your cylinder cool. Is this patch right here. And I thought, well, what the heck is that all about? What I did then, after doing some investigation, found out that behind there's a hole drilled. And what that's for is actually a sight glass. A sight glass would go here, probably all the way up here. And it would tell you from a distance, you wouldn't have to go right up to the hopper. You could see from a distance how high the water was inside the hopper and when you had to fill it up. Kind of a good idea, but more of an option really. Drip oiler. Who makes that drip oiler? Oh, I can't recall. You guys see that down there? Lonergan drip oiler. I pulled the drip oiler off, cleaned it up a bit, and make sure it was working. The flywheels would barely turn, very, very tight. What I realized eventually was these grease cups, which I have not yet cleaned out, are full of very old grease. It tells me that the restoration that was done on this motor was done a very long time ago, and I'm going to guess probably at least 40 years ago, the restoration on this. Not a great restoration, but someone plastered some paint on it. So what I found was bearing caps were cranked down very tight, and the wrist pin up at the top there, I hope you guys can see that. You see that shiny spot up there? That's brazing. Somebody's brazed the connecting rod up at the top loop. So there's a top loop at the top of the connecting rod that the wrist pin runs through, and then there's a cinch bolt that goes through and cranks it down. Well, you'll have spacers in that cinch, in a space between that cinch bolt, and you'll set your gap, your bearing gap basically. I think after talking to a couple friends of mine, what happened there was I had looked for damage. So what you do is you see a braze and you think, okay, well, what broke? I can't find anything that broke here. So I think that what happened was somebody went to press a bushing into the wrist pin, and when they pressed it in, they cracked it. And when they cracked it, they brazed it. It's probably not a huge problem because when your flywheels turn this way, so at this point, your flywheels are pushing against the bottom of that loop on the connecting rod. Does that make sense? I don't know if it does. Anyway, the con rod is pushing against the wrist pin on the bottom. And when you get your explosion, again, same thing. Pushes against the bottom of that loop on the connecting rod. Probably not going to be a problem, but just to be safe, I got a hold of a guy who's got a connecting rod. Tough things to find. Oddly enough, for these engines, with all the engines being made, it's very, very tough to find a connecting rod. I did find one. Has to have some Babbitt put on it for the bearing. What I also find was these bearing caps. Again, strangely enough, you'll always find a Waterloo engine with a cracked bearing cap. This one is a cracked right at the front here. Probably not going to be a big deal. A common farmer fix in the day which, you know, I start looking into ways I can kind of fix this and patch this together, was to run a loop over top. So run a loop over top of the bearing cap and use the bearing, the bolts to the main rod bolts, or the main caps bolts, sorry, to cinch that strap down, and it would hold the bearing all together. I could do that again, same thing. The guy that I'm dealing with also has a cap for me, which I will have to add Babbitt into there. Babbitt, in case some of you don't know, is a bearing material, bushing bearing material. It's cracked at the bottom side. Again, probably not a huge problem. It could probably run forever like this with that crack there, because the push of the con rod or the piston is, because the bearing blocks are on a bit of an angle, so I can show you, kind of like that. The push of that rod and the crank is towards the bottom and the back of that bearing. Probably not going to be a big deal, and for the way I'm going to run it, which will never be working it would probably run forever. So I've lubed this all up. Everything is freed up, as you can see. Flywheels turn fine. What I did was, in here you have springs. These are your governor weights, fly weights. I've taken the springs off because I want to run the motor really slow. I don't want to stress the hell out of it. That's your fine adjustment for your governor. This is your mass adjustment, your large scale adjustment for your governor. We're gonna try it like this. I'm gonna, whatever. We'll go like that. It shouldn't spin too fast. I've got the trip spring taken off. Where did I leave it? I left it here somewhere. There it is. Trip spring. Just dropped because I'm going to pull that igniter out. So, so as you can see, it does turn freely. I think it's at the point where we could try it out. Also has the crank guard. That's also the original crank guard. There's your springs, by the way. I did have to adjust the bearing caps. I leave the bearing caps fairly loose and let the crank run in, and then I'll snug them down later. But it's easier right now just to run them loose. Not so loose that the crank wants to jump off the bearings, but I did have to pull that connecting rod off and take a shim out of the wrist pin. There was a lot of slop in there, and you could actually hear it knocking pretty good when you move the flywheels back and forth. So, that more than anything I wanted to address and not have it cause me a problem down the road. So I don't know if this is the original skids, but it might be. And there's my heater coming back on again, so to interrupt me. So I'm going to get you on a stand, and I'm going to get that igniter pulled off, and let's have a look at it, and we'll see where we go from there. All right, guys, igniter's pulled off. That's the hole the igniter goes into, inside there. So I'm going to get you a view of it without getting right in your way. That ain't easy, but inside there is a cylinder. Let's move the piston up. You can have a look, maybe. Let's see if I can show you the top of the piston. And nope, of course I can't. Anyway, it's right at the front now. That's where the igniter goes. And what have we been doing? All right. So here's the igniter. So originally when I pulled it out, why don't I just unhook this battery? So originally when I pulled it out, these igniter points were right together, rusted together. So you would never make a spark like that, no matter how many times you crank that engine over. So what I did was I backed off the igniter adjust and filed the points. So I got a nice, it's not perfect. I mean, it's not, it actually needs new points. The points are completely wore out, but I think we can make it work. So I gave it a pretty good gap on the igniter points. See, they're just barely kind of touching up there. They should be flush. So this distance right here, the distance that it takes for this trip, so that'd be your trip finger. See if we push it for you. Pushes against there, then releases it. That distance right there is called dwell. So on your points, a lot of electrical systems, you may have heard the word dwell. Well, that distance that it takes for the points to touch and release, that's your dwell time. I'm going to just arbitrarily set that, I don't know, about right there, I think. It does affect your ignition timing, but I've got my ignition timing so retarded right now that I'm not going to worry about this little bit. I just want to have a good gap here so they're not fouling all the time. How do you hook it up? Okay, so this box inside here, I have a whole bunch of garbage inside there. Basically, I have a coil made up. I've got two windings from a generator wrapped around a whole bunch of coat hangers. And how does that work, you say? Well, inside that, the distance between here and over here is 7 ohms of resistance. How many feet of wire is that? Oh gosh, must be over 1,000 feet of wire. Of about maybe 22 gauge, 24 gauge wire. All in this pretty little box with these connectors on. Does it matter which way you hook this up? Could I take this and hook it up, which would be your return back to negative? Can I take that and hook it here and hook this here? Absolutely, it doesn't matter. You're just making a circuit. So I'll tell you what we'll do is we'll take this and we'll pretend to trip it like the trip finger would. Can you guys see how that works? I don't know if you can. It's kind of blocked. Basically, the trip finger goes over, pushes on that, releases it. So as you see it, it moves the points, it closes it. Let's see if I can get that clearer for you. It closes those points. And it's not. Of course it's not. I got my thumb in the way. God. Try to keep it somewhat clear for you. It closes those points there, releases them. When they release, that's when the spark happens, like I had explained before. So let's make this connection to the battery. I was having a real hard time focusing today. So I got it going here. Basically, you got two sides connected. This side's connected, and this side's connected. And the only thing that really connects them in a loop is when the points touch. When they release, they spark. Let's connect this all up, see if we can make a spark. All right, probably not as clear as I'd like, but we're all hooked up here. Let's see if we can make a trip, make a spark. See them touch? Okay, I'm going to pretend I'm on. There we go. I think that that is probably good enough to fire a fuel air mixture. Let's go with that. Let's put it back together so we can start that motor. All right, guys. So we're all hooked up. We're live. We got a little jar of fuel here. So the carburetor or the mixer can suck fuel up through this little fuel jar I got right here, which you can't see, but it's over here. And I got the mixer set at 1.5 turns open. That should be, I can go with that, I think. What we will do is we'll prime the mixer. So just shut that off because I don't want it to spark while I'm priming it. So to prime the mixer, I'm going to put my hand over, pull fuel up from the jar into the mixer. As soon as I feel fuel wet on my hand, I'll know that that's about enough. And it's pretty well there, I think. There we go. It's dripping. So that's enough. So the mixer's primed, which means there's fuel there ready to go. We're at 1.5 open. We'll put it on half choke, see how that goes. Connect it. And we'll give it a yank. See what happens. I think it's set up to run, so I've got the timing retarded considerably. I've done that so that basically it's not a big hit on the engine when it fires. it's kind of already got the momentum to go past the compression stroke. So we'll see if that works out. I don't know. I may end up having to grab a wire and shut it off really quick because I'm not sure where the governor is set at. So let's try for that. Oh, that's right there. It's actually already at compression. All right. It's promising. There's a pop. Let's give it more governor. Let's turn on the drip welder too. That's a good idea. Boy, if you're trying to run an engine slow, that's the way to do it. It's like right there, running as slow as it can. Let's increase it slightly. Well, let's close the mixer right off. Sounds like it's not getting enough fuel. We'll close a choke on it, basically. Increase the governor. Not quite getting past it. Let's see. Let's go with 2 turns open. There's a half. There's 1. Let's go with 1.5 open. Lots of fuel. Should go. Increase that governor some more. Can't tell if it's not dragging fuel or if I've got that spark set a bit too much dwell on the spark. Let's try no choke and 1.5 open. How does that go? Yeah, I've got that governor all the way tightened. I don't want to go that far. Should have been sparking already. Should have been firing. That's better. Sorry guys. That's like some new shaky cam technology I'm working on. It's not quite don't quite get all the bugs worked out of it yet, I guess, huh? Let's hook this back up. Refire it. Let's make sure we're going the right way. Yeah, that looks about right. I had it mounted on a box over here and the whole thing just fell over. And I figured, well, we can't go out on that note. That wouldn't be, we're engaged a little bit here. You can tell when you're engaged, basically that trip mechanism is pushing against the igniter, and when it has it kind of cocked, the points are touching, which gives you a spark. It doesn't now, so the points are not actually touching. Alright, there we go. Okay, where were we set here? I think that was about right. Open 1.5, 1.5. Let's go 1.5. Let's go somewhere there. With an open mixer. Oiler on. Yeah, that looks good. Give it a shot. Again. This is the Next day, in case you hadn't figured that out, we got clean clothes on. Look, Ma, I got clean clothes. Actually, let's take this off. I'll have to reprime this again. Just gotta draw that fuel back up in there. There we go. All right, that should do it. Yeah, I went to edit the video yesterday, and I realized how crappy it was with that big camera crash there. Put some glasses on. It's a nice strong hit. That's an exhaust whistle. Basically, it's dragging air through the exhaust port. Got an exhaust valve right there. The mechanism is holding the exhaust open. It does that so it can't suck any fuel or explode. Explode meaning ignite the fuel and end up with a power stroke. Shut that off. It's guess what happened. It obviously doesn't have to be that bouncy. I'll eventually mount it on a cart instead of this bouncy table I got here, and everything will kind of the governor weight, so it won't be flopping around. It won't be so erratic. It'll be a lot smoother. Anyway, that's it. I think it's fairly successful. There's really not a whole lot holding it up from running anyway. So, sort of the igniter, bearings, things like that. Pretty simple stuff. Anyway, what do we got? Don't forget, Robert Nurden's live channel is tonight, which would be 8 a.m. UK time, and around these parts, North America, somewhere around 2, 3 o'clock, 1 o'clock, depends where you are, Eastern Seaboard. Western, was it Mountain Time, Central, depends where you are. Anyway guys, have a good day.